The United States has announced coordinated overnight military strikes on 3 of Iran's key nuclear facilities, joining Israel in an unprecedented and high-risk escalation in the region. According to the White House, the operation targeted Iran's most fortified underground sites, a move President Donald Trump framed as necessary to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions. Trump, who had consistently campaigned on the promise of not getting the U.S. dragged into any new wars, now finds himself opening a volatile military front in the Middle East. The question is, what happens next? Iran has already promised to retaliate with all its might, and it has, in fact, begun doing so in the last few hours, firing missiles towards Israel in the early hours of this morning. To unpack all of this, I'm joined now by Dr. Heinrich Matthee, who is political risk analyst and director of the Pionier Institute. Good afternoon, Doc, and thank you for your time. So until the bombs dropped on the 3 nuclear sites, the U.S. President Donald Trump's official position was that he would take 2 weeks to decide whether or not to get the U.S. directly involved in this kind of way. Was that a decoy? And the intention was that, it was always to strike with this element of surprise, which seems to have been at play in this instance? Or is it a matter of Israeli pressure on the U.S. president to get the U.S. involved and, to use the words that are being used in Tel Aviv, finish the job? Is that bearing fruit now?
Yes, it's of course clear that Israel has been trying to trick or persuade the U.S. to become involved in the Iran campaign for years. And this must be Mr. Netanyahu's best week in politics, because he has succeeded in what he has tried to do with several U.S. presidents. They all refused. Previously, even sometimes between 2007 and 2022, the 3 heads of the Israeli Defense Force at the time also refused to go along with his plans. So this is really very remarkable from an Israeli point of view, that they succeeded in all of this. So the second option is what I believe is the case here. Remember that the U.S., before the attack of Israel, had already gone through 5 negotiation sessions with Iran to solve the nuclear issue. The Israeli attack basically sabotaged a negotiation process involving Iran and the US just before the 6th meeting, 2 days before that.
Yeah. So where does this leave the current situation? President Trump indicating that he has no intention of launching any further strikes, but at the same time saying that much depends on Iran's own reaction to the strikes. What options does Iran have? Presumably they do include directing their retaliation at Israeli interests instead of the U.S. assets in the region, as we have seen them beginning to do. But what other options do they have?
I think it's clear to understand that, of course, all the powers involved have different interests and views on this, and legitimate ones. And they all have civilian populations that are suffering or would suffer during war. In the case of Iran, indeed, as you said, if they respond in an undisciplined way with too big a retaliation against U.S. assets in the region, that may mean that they leave Donald Trump no option but to continue the war and become involved to a larger degree. For that reason, they are likely indeed to focus on continuing the war with Israel. Let's keep in mind that before this attack by Israel, there was a shadow war for years anyway between these 2 powers. Other options would be to, create more strategic ambiguity regarding the state of the nuclear program now. Keep in mind that Israel is a nuclear power, the biggest and strongest military power in the Middle East, and the US has nuclear weapons. And here they have attacked a country with a legal civilian nuclear program, which they claim will be used for weaponization. Other options, I think, would be to spread, which they've probably tried to do, while Israel was dominating the airspace, to try and disperse whatever civilian nuclear materials they may have. But in the end, a nuclear program like this relies on human capital. And that will be the key objective, probably, to protect as far as they can those scientists involved in this program.
Yeah, and you say that in the context of those scientists having been targeted in the last 10 days or so of the Israeli campaign. What's our best assessment, Doc, of the ability of both Israel and Iran to continue waging this conflict between themselves, even if the U.S. doesn't continue to participate, factoring in Israel's recent and significant weakening of organizations that are seen as proxies of Iran, Hezbollah and the likes, and this nearly 2-year campaign against Hamas in Gaza? But also recent concerns about stockpiles on both sides, stockpiles on the Israeli side as far as interceptors are concerned, and stockpiles of missiles as far as Iran is concerned.
Yes. Well, I think the key thing to say is that, of course, during a war like this, nobody has the full picture. What we think is happening is that Iran, or rather Israel, is stepping away from a previous strategic doctrine that focused on deterrence. And after the Hamas attack of October, brutal attack, of course, 2023, they have, first of all, bombed Gaza using, a very, very deliberate approach. After that, they attacked and degraded Hezbollah capacities in Lebanon. And we think that the approach now is not only aimed at the nuclear program, it's also aimed at degrading the infrastructure, also civilian infrastructure and energy infrastructure of Iran. And if the side effect is that there's a regime change, that would be great for Israel. Unlikely to happen, I think, at this stage, but still something they wouldn't mind, of course. But I think the one difference is that the new strategic doctrine, as far as we can tell, aims to really create a state that is much weaker, disrupted, destroyed, and that they hope that in this way they will keep Iran on the back foot for quite some time.
Doc, it's impossible to ignore the implications, intended or unintended, of the current focus on the conflict between Israel and Iran as far as it relates to what's been going on, the situation in Gaza, the catastrophic situation that's been unfolding in Gaza. I don't know, it would be, perhaps cynical to assume that perhaps was part of the strategic objective to ease the pressure, because just before this happened, just before Israel launched its airstrikes in Iran, the pressure was mounting, wasn't it, on Israel as far as the humanitarian and international law concerns in Gaza are concerned?
Yes, I think I would distinguish between Israel as such and the Netanyahu government. The pressure, especially on that specific government, with its coalition infighting, has been huge. Mr. Netanyahu especially is under pressure because he may face a criminal trial. And much of war is actually linked to domestic considerations. It's not only outside observers that say this. Even if you read Haaretz or the Israel Times of Israel, they said that this attack is also meant to divert attention from the pressure regarding Gaza.
All right. I've got to thank you for your time and your insights this afternoon. That's Dr. Heinrich Matthee, who is a political risk analyst and director of the Pionier Institute.